Church, where we reach the unreachable. Looking to further your education in the Word of God? Spirit of the Light Church is offering a $2,000 scholarship to the most compelling application. To apply, the details will be available on the next slide and on our website. If you wish to contact us here at Spirit of the Light Virtual Church, you can reach us on our Facebook page, Spirit of the Light, or you can reach us via email or our website, or you can reach us by phone and our address. We'd be more than happy to take your prayer requests or any questions that you may have. Please feel free to contact us. Thank you again for attending Spirit of Light Virtual Church. For more content, please feel free to join our YouTube channel, like and subscribe our videos there, or on Sunday at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, please come and join us for our live Bible study via Zoom. Once again, thank you for your attendance and have a blessed day.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Spirit of the Light Virtual Church. I lost my music, went blank on me for a minute, but also slides are a little out of sync with. Right? Okay, we're looking at the right thing now. We're still in the Old Testament, and we'll be going over the books of the law this evening. As we discussed last week, the Old Testament is split into 5 different sections, and the law or the Torah or the Pentateuch will be what we'll be reviewing this evening, and then in the following weeks we'll be going over the other 4 sections of the Old Testament. So the basic timeline of the events that happens in the Pentateuch or the Torah or the book of the law is, oh boy, before 4000 BC until 1806 BC were the events that happened in the book of Genesis. From 1800 BC to around 1445 BC, these are estimated dates. The events in the book of Exodus took place. 1445 BC were the writings of the book of Leviticus, was when that was given to Moses, not when it was actually written. Then 1445 BC to roughly 1407 BC were the events in the book of Numbers. And then the book of Deuteronomy takes us to about 1406 BC. And again, all three of these books was written by Moses. Moses, of course, didn't witness everything in all five books. Everything from chapter 2 of Exodus forward, Moses actually was involved in. Anything prior to that was the inspired word that was either passed down through oral tradition or was the word is given to Moses by God, or the events are given to Moses by God, which was how he was able to record that information. Okay. The book of Genesis, again, it's written events before 4000 BC up to around 1806 BC. It is credited to Moses as being the one who written these five books. The beginning of Genesis starts with the creation of the world, and then the creation of man followed that, and then the story of Adam and Eve and how they disobeyed God and was removed from the Garden of Eden. Those events is what we regard as when you hear either the fall of man or the or original sin. Those are phrases that are used to categorize what happened in the Garden of Eden. Then Adam and Eve have kids, and then we get to a man called Noah, and it covers the beginning of the family of man, how they resisted God and God's desires for them. And then we get up to Noah, because Noah was um, instructed to build an ark because God was angry with mankind due to their disobedience up until that point. So God was going to destroy everything on earth with the exception of Noah's family, which was on the ark that Noah built. And then there was a great flood, and all that was spared was Noah's family. Then after the flood receded and they found land, the Bible continues with what is called the patriarchs of the Bible. And they're Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it ends the book of Genesis with Jacob's son, Joseph. Before we get into the book of Exodus, go back one beat and talk about Abraham's family just to touch upon it. Uh, Abraham was a man who, and I think we covered this last week. God spoke to Abraham. God told him to be the father of many nations, which the nation of Israel is associated with. He had his son Isaac, and he had two sons. One was Ishmael, and one was Isaac. God made a promise to Abraham and his wife Sarah. They would have a child at a very advanced age. They didn't believe him, so they were disobedient to God, and Abraham had a son, which was Ishmael, outside of his marriage with Sarah. And then he eventually had Isaac to fulfill God's promise. Then Isaac had a son named Jacob, and he was notorious. He was a liar, I guess, in his first stage of his life, but then he wrestled with God. His name was changed to Israel, and Jacob had 12 kids. Joseph being the second youngest of the 12 kids. Joseph was very outspoken, I guess is the best word to describe uh, Joseph. He has some dreams, and he shared the dreams with his 10 older brothers that he will rule over them. They didn't like it, threw Joseph in a pit. The Egyptians found Joseph, took Joseph hostage, but because of his ability of that God would speak to him and allow him to interpret dreams, Joseph became very popular in Egypt. After that, he became a royal person, and he preserved his family because when the big uh, famine of the time happened, Joseph stored up food for Egypt. And when his family, his brothers, came to Egypt to obtain food to take back to their families, Joseph recognized them, kept the younger brother of Benjamin, and they reconciled after that. So it was through Joseph's economy of food in Egypt and bringing his family to Egypt. He preserved his family that way, and that was the end of the book of Genesis for the most part.
But I'd
Uh,
like to just add that Joseph didn't just preserve his family, he preserved Egypt and the surrounding countries because the Egyptians stored enough to feed them as well, and they sold the wheat to the foreign countries, which made them very wealthy. And therefore, Joseph found favor with the Egyptians because not only did he save them, he brought them great wealth and preserved his family.
yes. Thank you for filling in the blanks there, Brenda.
Oh,
Uh, and that moves us to the book of Exodus. Exodus covers a time frame from around 1800 BC until 1445 BC. And the book covers Israel's relationship with God as they enter into an agreement and they subjected themselves to his law and the Sinai or Mosaic agreement was what that agreement between God and the body of Israel was called. The Mosaic covenant is a more popular name for it. The book of Exodus covers their captivity in Egypt. Because after the Israelites came to Egypt because of the famine, and Egypt was the one that had the food, so a lot of the Israelites moved there. Over time, they became slaves of the Egyptians, and that was a major part of the story of Exodus is their servitude to Egypt until they were freed by a man named Moses. And Exodus covers the events that lead up to their release. And then after they were released from Egypt, through Moses, Moses met with the king Pharaoh several times. There were plagues that God placed on Egypt, and ultimately Pharaoh decided to let the Israelites leave, and that's where the separation of the Red Sea takes place. Because as soon as he allowed them to leave, he changed his mind. He tried to follow them. The Israelites got into the edge of the Red Sea, and God separated the Red Sea for the Israelites to pass, and then the Egyptians that followed them were drowned in the Red Sea as the sea went back to normal after the Israelites got to the other side. Then after the Israelites were free, God made an agreement or a covenant with Israel through Moses. Moses went to the mountaintop, and he was given a new covenant or a new agreement that Moses took from God that he came down the mountain and shared with the Israelites. This is called again the Sinai covenant and the Mosaic covenant, and it is also what we call the Ten Commandments. And the Ten Commandments is also referred to as the moral laws of the Jews. And the Ten Commandments cover things that pertain to God, things that pertain to how we should conduct ourselves in our family, and then how we should conduct ourselves within society. So we had God, and these were the laws, the four that pertain to God. The Israelites should have no other God besides the one true God, the God of Israel. They shall not make any graven image of anything and worship it. They were supposed to worship the one true God. They should not take the name of the Lord in vain. And then the fourth commandment was to remember the Sabbath day and to make it holy. And in the book of Genesis, the Sabbath day is the seventh day when God rested after he made creation in 6 days. Then there was the family, which was they shall honor their mother and their father. Then the other 5 dealt with how they should conduct themselves within society. They shall not kill, they shall not commit adultery, they shall not steal, shall not bear false witness against their neighbor, and they shall not covet or be jealous about their neighbor's property or anything that they had, their wives, their livestock. They should not covet, be jealous, and want anything that their neighbors had. Then after the book of Exodus, we move on to the book of Leviticus. And this book covered a time period around 1445 BC. And the title, Leviticus, comes from the Greek, the translation of the Greek word, which means the book of the Levites. And the Levites are the descendants of Jacob, who are designated to be the priests of Israel. And we talked about this last week. Jacob had 12 sons. These 12 sons represented the 12 tribes of Israel. 10 of the sons became the head of each tribe. And then Joseph, who already had power in Egypt, was not given a tribe, but 2 of his children became heads of the last 2 remaining tribes. Levi did not get a tribe because Levi, who was the head of the Levites, came from Levi, and they were designated as the priests, and they did not get one. Now, 4th bullet, the book of Leviticus gives great details of how Israel was to honor and worship God through the various rituals and ceremonies, which was needed as a way for Israel to recognize their sinful nature and atone for their wrongdoings. The book highlights rituals that were to be performed by the Jews to show their obedience and also to ask for their forgiveness if they stumble or disobey. The word the word stumble is one you hear a lot in the Bible, and that was just a way of saying that they disobeyed God. You know, of the sacrifices, there were 5 types, and each of the 5 had a very distinct purpose and how the Israelites were to sacrifice and what the sacrifice meant.
So these sacrifices are for the people or for the Levites, priests?
Are for
the priests
the priests,
to perform.
the people were the ones who did the offerings with the involvement of the priest. Okay. The grain
The priests,
offering,
they actually did the slaughter and the burning of the bread, the food, the wheat, the burnt offerings, and things of that nature was conducted by the priests, but the sacrifices were made by the people, correct?
the people gave the items to be sacrificed. Yes. And the ritual or the actual sacrifice, as you said, was what the actual priest did. Yeah. Yeah. The grain offering. Now, this was an offering that the Israelites did to show their devotion to God for his goodness, and the grain offering was a voluntary offering. It usually involved some type of cooked bread that did not have yeast and had salt. Some of the bread was burnt and offered to God, and the remainder of the bread was to be given to the priests. Another form of offering was called the fellowship offering, and the fellowship offering was also called the peace offering as well. The purpose of this offering was to bless or consecrate a meal between parties before God as a sign of fellowship, a sign of peace, and a sign of future prosperity. And bread, cattle, sheep, or goat could be used in the sacrifice. And the portions that were not suitable for eating, or the portion that was left over after they finished eating, was what was sacrificed to God. Then we had the burnt offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering. The burnt offering was also called the offering of ascent because it went up. And the burnt offering was for the general atonement of sin and a expression of devotion towards God. And various animals could be offered during the burnt offering: a bull, sheep, goat, a dove, or a pigeon. And these things depended on the prosperity of the person that was doing the offering and also who that person was within society. Now, the sin offering was an offering to God for unintentional sin, and it was to purify themselves before they re-entered into the presence of God. Since it was an atonement offering, it included elements of a burnt offering, but it also included elements of a fellowship offering as well. But the one who committed the sin, who the offering was for, they did not share in the offering on the fellowship portion of it. And then finally, we have the guilt offering. The guilt offering was also called the trespass or the reparation offering. And this offering was to make atonement for a sin that the person had actually did that was intentional. Sin offering was for unintentional sin, but this was for an actual sin that the person, a violation that they know that they did. And this offering had a monetary value based on it, based on the debt that the sin actually created. And silver could be substituted as a payment for the sin in lieu of an animal sacrifice. So these were the 5 offerings that was discussed in the book of Leviticus that the Israelites did as a offering to God, either for things that they did wrong, things that they didn't purpose to do wrong, or just to show their devotion to God or their fellowship commitment to each other and to make peace. But there's also certain ritualistic ceremonies that was in the book of Leviticus that the Israelites had to honor as well. And there was quite a few of them. There is the feast of the Passover, and this was on the 14th day of the first month at twilight. And Passover goes back to the book of Exodus and Moses. Because one of the curses was the firstborn of each family was killed, was slated to be killed, unless you put blood on your door, which and then the angel of death would pass over that house. So that's what the Passover references to, and they would do this on the 14th day of the 14th day of the first month. Then there was the feast of the unleavened bread, the 15th day of the same month, and they had to eat unleavened bread or bread without yeast for 7 days. The feast of the first fruits, when the harvest was reaped, they had to bring the first fruits to the priest. Feast of the harvest, a grain offering was made to the Lord 50 days after the seventh Sabbath day after the first fruits. Feast of the trumpets. On the first day of the seventh month, the Israelites was to take a sabbatical rest, and this period was announced by the blowing of a trumpet. The Day of Atonement. The 10th day of the seventh month, you should give a fire or a burnt offering to the Lord, and you shall not work. Then lastly, the Feast of the Tabernacles, which was the 15th day of the seventh month, and this lasted for 7 days. They shall not work, and they were to give a burnt offering to the Lord. So these are the ritualistic ceremonies in Leviticus that the Israelites gave honor to God as their Lord and as their Lord, as their God. And the Sabbath, which was on every seventh day you shall rest. And this goes back to the book of the Genesis and the seventh day when God rested. The Israelites celebrated that moving forward, and they were to rest on the seventh day of each week. You're on mute there. Because on the first 6 days, he created the heavens and the earth, God, and on the seventh day, he rested. And that's what the Sabbath celebration was about.
And I also wanted to add to the Feast of the Passover, that was to commemorate the freedom of the Egyptians. I mean, the Israelites from the Egyptians that Pastor Rob was talking about earlier. And the last plague was the death of the firstborn, as declared by Pharaoh. And God told, as Rob said, the people of Israelite to put the blood of the lamb over the door. And then their firstborns would be spared. And the Lord told them to repeat this celebration until the end of times. And so we will get into Jesus Christ replacing that, him becoming the lamb and the Passover in future weeks. But remember, that first feast is key to the freedom of the Israelites and the freedom of all mankind.
Thank you for that additional information. I
You're
would
welcome.
also say this will be key in the New Testament because Jesus plays a role in that won't expose for you now. You have to stick around and hear about it when we get to the four Gospels. After Leviticus, we move on to the book of Numbers. The book of Numbers cover approximately 40-year period where the Israelites traversed from Mount Sinai to Moab. And the Hebrew name of the book means in the desert. Because after the Israelites were freed from Egypt, before they got to their promised land, they spent 40 years in the wilderness of the desert because, as happened time and time in the Bible, the Israelites were disobedient to God and didn't follow their God's laws. So the generation that was freed from Egypt pretty much had to die out before God fulfilled his promise for them to enter into the land that he was going to give them. And this period of time is covered in the book of Numbers. And also something in the book of Numbers as well, the Greek title is what the translation that gives us are Numbers, because the entire first chapter refers to the census of the tribes of Israel. The book dictates the laws that gave the conditions of Israel's possession and enjoyment of the promised land. These conditions included the desire to possess the promised land, to respect the leaders chosen by God, and to maintain the holiness of the covenant community in the land of promise. The book of Numbers reminds us that when things went well, when Israel was obedient to God's law, but things went poorly when they were disobedient to the laws of God. And then lastly, we have the book of Deuteronomy. This covers a period of time of roughly 1407 to 1406 BC. Now, at this time, there was a new generation of Jews that followed after the first generation of Jews that escaped from Egypt, escaped from Israel, should be escaped from Egypt. The first generation had died out, and Moses was now dealing with a whole different group of folks. So Moses regave the law and explained the covenant between Israel and God to these people, but he gave it in the new context of what the world was 40 years later after their conquest and their settlement. Moses taught these people about God's faithfulness, and the Greek meaning of the title means the second law. Now, this was not a new set of laws that Moses was expressing, but it was the reiteration, and he gave better explanation to the new generation of what the first law meant. And this was the Greek meaning of the title. Now, the Hebrew meaning of the title of the book, these are the words, is relevant as well, because Moses was actually expressing his farewell to Israel in these final words that he had for them. Because, I think this is my last slide, it is. We go back, before we go here. Because Moses never entered into the land that God promised to Israel. Joshua took over for Moses because he died at this point. And Joshua became the leader of the Israelites at this point as they entered into the promised land. And the first book of the historical books is the book of Joshua, and that is where the history of the Israelites will continue, and we will pick up with the book of Joshua and the historical books. We probably won't get through them all next week. There's quite a few, but we will begin that dialogue next week. So that brings us to the end of the books of the law, or the Torah, or what's called the Pentateuch. Thank you for spending time with us this evening. And here's our contact info if you wish to reach out to us. And again, we have our prayer meetings on Wednesdays at 5:30. We have our beginning of the Sabbath service on Fridays at 6 in the evening. Then we will have our regular, more in-depth discussional Bible study on Sundays at 9. Rosalind, anything you wish to add here before we sign off for the night? You're on mute.
Thank you all for your time, and I hope you find this information beneficial, life-changing, and inspirational. It is the word of God, the word of truth, and the word of freedom. Amen.
Amen. So you all have a blessed rest of the week, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.